This paper is basically building upon an earlier work we had called active ownership, where we found engagements with companies on ESG matters may create value. And an important finding from that paper was that such engagements, once basically they are done in a collaborative way with the institutions, they become much more impactful, both for changing the things in the firms and creating value. And in this paper, we basically delve into that, and we are going to check these engagements that are done coordinated way by institutions, and then see how exactly these engagements are made and what create good practices. Now, this is the first paper, to our knowledge, to study the nature and benefits of coordinated, collaborative, and international efforts by a prominent international network of activist shareholders to influence the investee companies on environment and social (ENS) issues. And we get our data from this institution called Principles for Responsible Investment, PRI, that is founded in 2006 and supported by UN. In fact, their website is unpri.org, and it is the leading network for investors committed to responsible ownership and long-term sustainable returns. In fact, by March 2021, PRI has more than 3,600 signatories from 80 countries, representing over 100 trillions in assets. It's huge. And this is just a figure showing you how the number of signatories in orange line has increased dramatically since 2006 to 2020. And of course, also the assets under management that's covered by that. If you look at basically the geographical distribution of these institutions, Europe is leading, then followed by US, and then the rest of the world. And this is just a snapshot from an ongoing collaborations led by PRI in their website, which you can also see in this here. They are engaging on Climate Action 100+. They are a participant on that initiative where they are targeting firms with the top, if you like, pollution, carbon emission, and then try to reduce that. And after that 100, maybe they'll go to the next 100. That's why it's 100+. They engage on governance, environment, disclosure issues, or social issues, as it is mentioned. They essentially bring institutions to come together and provide them a platform, which they call the collaboration platform, and then target the companies that they are invested in to change things on environment and social issues. They may just say the companies that they are invested in that, look, you are polluting the environment, the river, we want you to do something to reduce it. Or they may say, we noticed you're using child labor, we would like you to stop doing that. Or we would like you to disclose more about ESG, etc. And they follow that up. Here are some examples of the signatories. There is the investment managers, asset owners, and service providers. Essentially, it is kind of who's who in this investment world. These are the large, very well-known institutions that are part of the signatories of PRI. And in fact, PRI, being a signatory of PRI is a good signal for these institutions that they are really committed to ESG causes. And PRI grades them. In a sense, they can be graded as a student of A+ or B, etc. And if they are not really actively engaging, particularly in the recent years, PRI may cease their membership and also remove them as well. Now, we think this is really desirable attribute for research because these engagements are logged in a platform by a third party, not by the firms themselves. And there is no retrospective data revisions. This may sound obvious, but in fact, we've seen in the past and also recently, some papers showing that certain basically databases are allowing people to retrospectively change the data, which is obviously problematic, which we don't suffer from. Engagements are supported by multiple asset managers, investment managers, and service providers. Unlike our earlier paper, Active Ownership, where we got the data from one single large UK asset manager, now we have a truly global database of investors from all around the world and the target companies that are engaged all around the world as well. And there's dated record for each engagement. That means we don't rely on ESG scores or ratings. Even if you're scoring super high in the ESG rating, if you do something really good, we can detect that, although in the ratings, it will not be able to observe econometrically. Just very briefly touching upon the collaboration that we are interested in, the dynamics of the collaboration. Obviously, there is benefits to collaboration. You pool the resources, you share the risk, you basically share the information and cost. This is rather important for institutional investors, particularly the diversified institutional investors, because even if they are huge, their investment in a particular company might be relatively small. They may just have maybe 0.5% of the company, and therefore when they want to engage with the company, they may not have enough clout to be able to change things. But if they can come together, which we will see shortly, they do, they can reach a combined, say, 10, 15, 20% of the voting power of the company, then they will be a significant, basically, block to be listened. And this is particularly, as you may imagine, important for mid-sized institutions. Obviously, these are still huge, but relatively speaking, the mid-sized one. The reason I'm mentioning this, in our database for these PRI-led engagements that we are interested in, we do not have the big three, the BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity. They seem to be preferring to engage by themselves rather than collaborating with others. What are the costs of collaboration? Obviously, one of the important one is the free riding on competition. If your engagements create value, then that's going to be shared by your competitors. And these engagements are rather costly. You need to have a certain, basically, ESG team, spend a lot of time doing the analysis, engaging with the firm, etc. And therefore, the coordination is difficult. Therefore, we need to understand how they get around these free riding concerns. And there could be legal regulatory barriers. I'll just touch upon this thing that if you really compare the US, say, versus with the UK, where both of them are coming from, obviously, the common law background, US seems to be a bit more discouraging such collaborative actions among the institutions. And Bernard Black and his co-author has a really nice paper on that called Hail Britannia, where he discusses the historical reasons why such divergence might have happened. And basically allowing running such concert parties are a concern in the US, whereas it is much more basically permissible, if you like, in the UK. And maybe that might be one of the reasons also why maybe this PRI is headquartered in London and a bit stronger in Europe, although, as I said, US is catching up. We think PRI as a third-party coordinator can help substantially exploiting these advantages and overcome the challenges of collaboration. Let me jump into our research procedure. PRI, in fact, allows you to coordinate any projects you like as an institution, but they also run some measured ones by themselves, which this is the ones that we are focusing on. This is called the PRI coordinated project. They are mostly about environment and social issues. Even if it's about governance or UNGC, Global Compact, they kind of tie back to ENS issues. And we are looking at these engagements over 2007 and 2017. These are, as I said, larger projects for which we have a better basic data granularity and quality. There is 1,654 dialogues. This is the engagement sequences, if you like, with the target companies, which usually take about a few years, maybe a year or two. And we see basically almost like 1,000 companies, listed companies targeted in 63 countries by 224 investors from 24 countries. And as I said, these are asset owners, investment managers, and service providers. And we basically link this data that we were given by PRI to other basically databases to do our analysis. And here are our main findings. Number one, which firms are targeted? We find that it is the firms that are in the developed countries like US, UK, France, and Japan. And this is, to me, it is a bit concerning in a sense that we see a polarization, like the good firms, they become even better, but then maybe the laggards, they may not be able to catch up well with the leading firms. What are the industries that are engaged? It's the manufacturing, infrastructure, utilities, wholesale, and retail. I think these are something expected, particularly on manufacture and infrastructure. Wholesale and retail, we also see a reminiscent results in earlier paper, active ownership. It seems that the companies where they have consumer-facing, if you like, structure, for which the reputation plays a huge role, both as a carrot and stick, we see that they are the ones that are engaged. The target firms, they are large firms. See, if I may contrast with the hedge fund activism, where obviously Wei and her co-authors have a seminal paper on, they find usually the small to medium firms are being targeted by hedge funds where they can have a control. Where here, if you can call this a, say, ESG activism, we find that they target large firms, again, because we think that there's more resources for ESG actions, and also perhaps the reputation plays a role. High percentage of sales from foreign countries, again, reputation concerns. High ownership from the engaging group, that means you have skin in the game, therefore you are more likely to engage and you'll benefit from that. An interesting point, these target firms have already a high ESG score. They are already doing really well. This is kind of the polarization that I was trying to mention. Now, which institutions engage and lead? Which we find in a typical and average engagement, the 26 signatories come together. And 2 of them are domestic and 24 are foreign, meaning domestic ones are the investors that are headquartered in the place where the target firm is headquartered. And if you look at asset managers, owners, and service providers, you see 14 asset managers, 11 owners, and 1 service providers. And what we find is size and engagement have an inverse U-shaped relation, as I mentioned. Very small institutions and very large ones seem not to prefer to collaborate as much as the ones that are in the mid-size. And one of the important takeaways from this, what we find is what we call a 2-tier strategy, where you have a lead signatory supported with others, seem to create much higher success. And this is something that has evolved over time. This hasn't started as the default, if you like, engagement strategy, but over time it seems that this has been picked up, and this comes out rather strong in our findings. Now, when we look at what influences institutions to engage and lead, we find the role of home bias and free riding concerns. Regarding the home bias, basically, if it is a domestic firm, the institutions are more likely to engage and lead the engagement because maybe they share similar concerns, they speak the same language, they know each other, cultural and geographic proximity might play a role. For the engagement decisions, if the institutions have fewer past or continuing projects, they are more likely to engage. That means it's really costly for them, and they will try to minimize that cost if they can. Well, this is something I was trying to say, that PRI is now checking more closely those institutions that are not necessarily active. But if you look at the lead institutions, for them, the fewer past doesn't play any role. That means they are not necessarily escaping from the duty. They are just basically, if they are too busy with many other projects, then they may refrain leading another one, but otherwise they are there at the forefront. And they have high exposure to the target firm. That means they are much more invested in the firm. Therefore, if there's something going to be gained, they are going to gain perhaps more than others. That may be one way to go around free riding concerns. Another thing that we are contemplating, an important mechanism to go around the free riding, is the reputation. That if you are basically claiming yourself as an ESG fund, then you'd better perhaps go and engage and show these engagements and maybe take lead in these engagements, so that then you will increase your inflow and solidify your point. Alan Brough and his co-authors have a nice paper on this Wolfpack activism. Although they are the focus on hedge fund activism, they emphasize in this theory of work how such reputational channels might play a role in going around these free riding concerns, which we think is even stronger here in this setting. What determines the success? I already told you this 2-tiered structure, having a lead activist followed by the supporting ones. But when we qualify that, we find that if the lead is a local institution with the target firm, it works even better. And for the supporting investors, if they are basically large ones, basically if they are influential, meaning they have large AUM, big holdings in the target, and they have a formal process, that means they have ESG people within the firm, and they have perhaps high employer culture ratings, that they have integrities, so that they also say the target firms do good ESG things. First, they show in themselves that they are adhering such practices. All these factors contribute towards the success. And then what is the impact of the successful engagement? Similar to active ownership, particularly when there is a lead investor, we see improvements in financial and accounting returns. We see a decrease in the stock return volatility, right? This is kind of a really nice thing, that return goes up and the risk goes down, Sharpe ratio is improving. Interestingly, we don't see a change in lead activist shareholding in target. Again, compared to hedge fund activism, hedge funds, once they make their money, once they make their successful engagements, they may leave the company and then go for another one. In this case, the lead shareholder, even if they achieve success, they stay with the company, and then they may have a much longer horizon. But we do see a bit of a decrease in the supporting activist shareholding. If I may basically summarize the whole exercise, basically we have this fantastic data from PRI collaboration platform for universal owners with very long-term, if you like, horizon, engaging with the target firms all around the world on ESG issues. We find that there is basically a two-tier engagement strategy where there's a lead and the supporting shareholders seem to be increasing the success and impact of the engagements. I liken this to this Chinese dragon problem in the festivals, where one guy has to hold the head and then the supporting ones have to tackle the tail, and you need a bit of a coordination for that. And you see that similar things in private equity and syndicated loan markets as well. And we find that if the lead becomes domestic and the supporting guys are influential, that's going to really increase the success. If I can just basically end with an analogy to movies, which I really like a lot. For those of you who know me, I'm very into movies. I recently seen this Avengers movie. There's Marvel comics. There is the super characters that are basically fighting with this evil guy called Thanos, who wants to totally eliminate the world. If we can make the analogy, these ESG concerns, if they're causing this existential risk, we need some sort of superheroes, if you like, to target with this evil. And our superheroes are these institutions, if you like. And if they basically have influential powers, they're going to be rather successful in engaging. And in that movie, if you see in the Avengers, there is a local guy called Captain America. He's not necessarily the most clever guy within that batch or the one with the highest powers, but he's the local guy who can unite all the basic
Sam, I think we found
other characters to fight against, and this is something we find. That's it. You can download the papers over here. And this is a logo I invented with a huge inspiration from Drink Responsibly. I changed it with Invest Responsibly. I hope I haven't run too much on time. Thank you for your understanding. And I look forward to Wei's discussions.
Thank you so much, Augustin. I mean, you played the pinch hitter role so well. It's not easy to step in on short notice, but you did fantastically. And our discussant is Wei Jiang from Columbia. Wei, floor is yours.
I start saying that it's quite a challenge to be a discussant in this case. The reason is that the paper has already been presented for 64 times. Actually, I counted 3 times. Every time I came up with a slightly different number. So, but it just shows the importance of the topic as well as how influential the paper has already been. It is an incredibly comprehensive and polished analysis of coordinated engagement on responsible investing, or ESG, by shareholders affiliated with probably the most prominent international network. And Augustin will show it. The members include all the name brand asset owners, investment managers, and service providers. Now, it is a very detailed event-level database analysis, not a score-sorted analysis. That's one of the differentiators. And I found the paper to be very highly educational. I also found results to be uplifting. So this is a bright future for the world. So what I do is that I hope to push the paper on a few important conceptual issues. By no means I want to make the paper even longer. Maybe it's a way for authors to think about what follow-up research could be. Now, one key question I have in mind is that what the key frictions are that will require this kind of coordinated intervention from the shareholders. So when it comes to ESG, the usual frictions people can think about the following. So is the engagement mostly about resolving a trade-off between short-term shareholder value or a broader stakeholder welfare? So this is one thing. Or because it's an international network, is it resolving the conflict or friction between narrow national interests and global well-being when a river flows across different countries, or the climate change pollution could affect other nations? Or what I read from this paper is that this engagement seems to be still more fundamentally about shareholder value per se. At least the focus is on shareholder value, but it is about shareholder value with externalities. Now, there are 2 types of externalities even in the space of engagement regarding shareholder values. One is the coordination, friction, and free riding among the investors, which seems to be the emphasis and focus of this paper. But I can also think about another externality. Basically, it's the externality from some portfolio firms to other firms, as well as to the broader society. So if you think about overseas corruption, which also the paper mentioned, if some firms are bribing overseas officials to get certain deals, it will hurt honest firms, but it's not something that one firm can resolve. Maybe the internationally coordinated engagement will solve this kind of problem. So I like to know better as in all this, among all these categories, maybe a little bit of all, but there must be a subspace when this kind of coordinated engagement has a unique advantage to be particularly effective compared to other forms of shareholder activism or shareholder engagement. So this is, I think, will really, really play up the leadership, the thought leadership of this paper, even it really doesn't require any additional data analysis. Now, the second, like the myth that I have from not just this paper, but a lot of paper on this topic area is that where does the performance improvement come from? Because we are talking about operating and financial performance, while engagement is more on the ESG type. And this paper document, which is great to know, we're always happy when people are doing well, also doing good. And the paper document that is particularly successful when the case has a clear leadership and those that are successful in their original goal sense. So if they push successfully on the ESG issue, they're also more successful on operating and financial performance. That is great. As I said, it's very spiritually uplifting finding, but we like to know exactly why this should be the case. Now, one thing I read a paper that I was not particularly clear how success of engagement was classified, because it's not related on ESG rating, which is great. But I just wonder whether the internal classification of success could be influenced by the firm performance exposed, even not consciously by the people who are rating the firm. So when the firm's overall doing well, sales, operating performance, etc. Now, the whatever people who are rating this engagement more likely to classify successful. That's one possibility. And the other one, I think, is more fundamentally, we all want to know more in the black box, the mechanism from engagement on environmental and social matters to measurable financial gains relatively soon. And another issue that if we think about coordination mitigate negative externality, for example, it will prevent everybody from bribing overseas officials or from upstream river country to pollute the river that negatively impact downstream country or firms, then there would be financial gains and operating gains to peer and related and effective firms, and not just a firm that the network is directly engaging. So I just want to know, now obviously peer effects is notoriously very difficult to measure, but I just wonder whether the analysis could also count for the negation of the negative externality, and to any extent this might even making a direct benefit to be an underestimation, which is also good news for the study. Now, the next one is if I were to zoom into the financial gains, I like to point out the two sides of stock returns. Now, should a firm that excel in ESG or responsibility measures also incur higher stock returns? Now, there has been new theory of how shareholder preference could affect asset prices. There are multiple papers, but let me outline one paper because I think the prediction is more clear cut. That's a Pastor et al. The 2020 paper. It basically showed the virtuous firms, their stocks should have lower ex-ante expected returns, especially when the average ESG preference of the shareholders is stronger because shareholders already benefit from non-pecuniary benefit, and also the greener or more virtuous stocks may be able to hedge climate risk or reputation risk, so they're truly low-risk stocks, which the author also showed that the volatility of the stock is lower. But however, during the interim, the more virtuous firms could actually have a higher realized returns if we are moving toward the steady state by realizing how good, how great these firms are, how these firms deserving a lower discount rate. So in the interim, the stock return should actually increase. So on the right panel, I posted on 2 conflicting evidence that show that the stock returns, you could find either direction, you could justify it. Like the McKinsey report is a meta-analysis, basically show, most of the over 2,000 studies around the world saying that ESG impact on the equity return is positive. But however, there's now a service provider called a rep risk. Rep is for reputation. So when the rep risk is low, that's actually a more virtuous firm. They are less likely to subject to a reputational damage like the oil spill of BP. So that's ex-ante lower risk firms. And if you sort the portfolio, you actually find low rep risk, the more virtuous firms had higher realized return for all the period since up to about early 2019. So what it's telling us is that maybe we are still in the realization stage to realize how good these firms could be. We underestimate the value of the virtue, but maybe by 2019, we're entering a new steady state, but we just don't know where we are. And you could find any abnormal stock return depending on how we map into the steady state or the movement toward the steady state. Now, I think, I say this, to the last slide of the main issue is that what I found most fascinating reading this paper is about how exactly does a network mitigate free riding. I think that could be the key. That could be, it's the most interesting part is I read it could justify a brand new study. Because what I read is that the platform financed by quite modest membership fees distribute some engagement costs to all members ex ante, but it's a very small proportion of the engagement cost. Is about dissemination, communication, forming a group, etc., but really doesn't cover the cost of discovery, doing research, the actual engagement cost, portfolio rebalancing, etc. And it may still discourage free riding ex post, because if I were investor join a network, I can just tag along, being member of the coalition rather than being an active leader. So it partially explains the overall insignificance of leadership prediction regression. You have local firms, high ownership, few ongoing projects, but these are very generic variables rather than characterize the nature of the investment style or the type of investors we are looking at. Now, how do these networks solve this problem? They have been around for so long. I'm sure they figure out it could be, do leaders rotate? Now, do successful leaders reciprocate among themselves? I tag you on this time, you tag me on later time, but both our reputation would be our assets to play such a rotation or reciprocatory role. And you only measure influence as the ownership stake, but influence could be the centrality in the network, past success. I think it's a more like a rich measurement that we could go this. And the other things, how do different parties coordinate on the exits? Because if you exit same time, you coordinate on exit, that would be a bad thing. So you should uncoordinate on exit, but how do you deal with these issues? Now, finally, I will go very quickly about the specific questions. Now, coordination impose a legal challenge about joint reporting on trading privilege. That could deserve some more discussion. I suggest move to calendar-based portfolio for long-term stock risk, more quantified measure for network, and update some references, including paper presented just before this paper. So that's all. Just stop on time. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Wei, for a great discussion that focuses on the big picture. Augustin, would you like to take a minute to quickly respond? Or Elroy, are you back online?
I've seen Elroy. Okay, maybe he may want to take.
Is my voice coming through? Can you hear?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, right. I don't know what happened. My apologies for my extreme gratitude to Ozhan for stepping in. You should all, there's a large number of you listening to this, you should all be so lucky as to have a person that you work with closely as I do with Ozhan. Such a wonderful co-author, and he's done all the work now. I don't know, Ozhan, do you want to pick up on some of those questions? I could share a few thoughts.
Sure. First of all, thanks very much, Wei, I think, for your thoughtful discussion and great points. What I will do is maybe I took some notes on the order that you were presenting. I think the way I think about this is that it's all about tackling the negative externalities. And it is going to be basically what we show, or at least in the earlier paper, active ownership. One way to tackle it, and I think that might really work well with the companies, is if this could be somewhat aligned, interest could be aligned well with shareholder value maximization, that would work really well. But that's not the only way. There could be other ways of tackling it, like impact investing or other ways. But I think that's certainly we can basically perhaps clarify that a bit more. You ask about these, what are the channels that could be causing these improvements? In this paper, in fact, at your final slide, you were saying that the paper is about this free riding, etc. This is exactly what we wanted to focus more in the paper, more about how the collaboration is done, how it is achieved in the most efficient way, rather than the performance per se, although we have some performance results as well. And one of the reasons we thought is because in the previous paper, we kind of show some of the channels why such increase in the performance side might happen, such as, after successful engagements, your employees are happier. This is kind of in line with Alex Edmonds' papers. And then they may just basically be much more productive. You attract long-term investors that are not necessarily very myopic, that may reduce to basically the cost of capital. We find some evidence on that. You basically may signal that you're a really good firm, and that basically is really good also. We find improvements in the G index, for instance. And then you basically, you may just do much better sales because you're a green company. You're basically bragging about the rest. So there are various channels why and how this could happen. We haven't looked at this in this paper particularly because we wanted to have to focus more on the collaboration, coordination part.